Welcome everyone. On behalf of the Prime Barrel team and the club, I welcome everyone on this call today. This is very special in that normally, as I was just telling the guys, we do these things once a month, but Frey Ranch insisted on doing this without even knowing that we already conduct these tastings. So it's a perfect marriage of sorts. And the way they do it is a bit different from what we are all used to. Normally, somebody from the brand gets on a call and they're usually sitting in their home office or sometimes in their warehouse, and we go for the entire tasting. Today, if I understand correctly, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong, we're actually going to receive a virtual tour of your physical distillery, which is exciting and new to everyone. So without further ado, I'll just kick it back to you guys and take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for coming. I'm Colby Frey.
I'm Ashley Frey.
This is our Mike. He's our VP of Marketing and Sales. And then this is Jesse. He's our Hospitality Manager. We're from Frey Ranch. So it all started, my family's been farming in Northern Nevada since 1854. Nevada didn't even become a state until 1864, 10 years later. And so we've been continually farming in Nevada ever since 10 years before it was even a state. And ever since I was a little boy, I wanted to be a farmer. And as I got older, I really started to like whiskey. And Ashley and I were looking for ways to really showcase the crops that we grow. And we thought, what better way to really marry those two passions together than to make whiskey out of the grains that my family's always grown here in Northern Nevada. And so really the importance of the old farming part is we take that knowledge that's been passed on from generation to generation on how to grow the crops in our specific soil, with our irrigation techniques, with our fertilizer management, everything. And we use that to grow better inputs. And with anything with better inputs, you end up with better outputs. So by growing better grains, we end up is the best chance you can get making better whiskey. There's a saying in the wine industry that you can't make good wine out of bad grapes. And it's like that with everything. So with better inputs, you end up with better outputs. And so here we sacrifice quantity on the farm often for quality. There's a lot of things we can do to create better quality grains for distilling purposes, but they almost always lower our yields on the field. And so by growing it ourselves is the best way to ensure that we're getting the best quality for our purposes. So, like most farms buy their grains from a big co-op, there might be 5, 10, 100 farmers all putting their grains into the same silos, and you really don't know what you're getting, how it was grown, what pesticides, if any, were applied to them, the exact variety of the grain even. And so there's so much that goes with growing it ourselves. And so we're in Fallon, Nevada, which Fallon's considered the oasis of Nevada. Nevada is really a giant desert. If you go 10 miles in any direction, you'll hit nothing but dirt. And really from us to Las Vegas, which is 360 miles away, we're in Northern Nevada, there's nothing but dirt, and so being here in Fallon, we have beautiful water that comes from both sides of Lake Tahoe through the Truckee and the Carson rivers to a reservoir where we get all of our water to irrigate all of our crops. So it's kind of the best of both worlds because we don't get a lot of rainfall, but we have beautiful water from the Sierra Mountains, which is it originates on both sides of Lake Tahoe and even part of Lake Tahoe, which is known for its beautiful water, and it flows down to us. So we're irrigating the crops when they need to get irrigated, so we can really grow the best quality grains that way. So the distillery is located right in the middle of our farm, and Ashley and I live right here on the farm, so it's really a big part of who we are and what we do. So it's like for a farmer, it's a dream come true to be able to share our crops and our hard work with everybody. So
we're going to be tasting 5 whiskeys today, which I'm really excited about. Right off the bat, I'd like to start with our Flagship bourbon. That's 90 proof. And then I'd like to try it side by side with our quad malt. And the reason is that it's the same mash bill, but the bourbon obviously has the malted barley, while the quad malt, all 4 of the grains have been malted. So I think this would be a really fun exercise, and I want you guys to share your tasting notes, what you're picking up. I don't know if when the labels were created, but we do have the mash bill on the back of every bottle. And on our bourbon, it is 66.6% yellow dent corn, 10% winter wheat, 11.4% winter rye, and 12% two-row barley that's been malted on site. So that's the bourbon. Same mash bill, as I mentioned in the quad malt.
It's literally the same grains from the same fields. They're just malted. Yeah, but we do have a malt house on site where we malt traditionally barley. As you all know, malted barley is a main ingredient in almost all whiskeys. But you can malt any grain. And so that's why our goal when we started was to really showcase the grains that we're growing here on the farm. And so we thought, what better way to do that than to play around with things like malting and different mash bills. So it's really fun to taste them side by
Yeah,
side.
and both of these are 90 proof. So go ahead, share your tasting notes. I actually haven't tasted them side by side in a really long time. So I'm excited.
I can tell you, as a club, we've been warming up to an idea of malted components in a mash bill, but I don't think we've ever tried anything like this, where all 4 components were malted. So that I'm excited to try this.
Yeah, and like Ashley said, our traditional flagship bourbon is 4 grain, and we felt it's really important to have the rye and get that spiciness from the rye, but also have the creaminess from the wheat. Like our wheat gives it a really creamy mouthfeel, and they really balance each other out in the 4 grain.
Getting a little bit more like grassiness on the quad malt, like mid palate.
And with the quad malt, what I love about it is right now this time of year the corn's probably 6-7 foot tall. And it's growing super fast. Every time we irrigate it, it probably grows 2 feet. I mean, it's crazy how fast it's growing. And it's transpiring all this like humidity, and it's just amazing the aroma that you get as you're walking through the cornfield irrigating it this time of year. And the smell that I get when I'm irrigating the corn right now is the flavor that I get on the quad malt.
I didn't get to the quad malt yet, but on the nose, your flagship product, to me, is a bit smoky, or maybe it's just me, but I've
heard that before, yeah.
Yeah.
You get a lot of dark fruit.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was, for me, it was like a blast of raisin right off the bat. And then the quad malt smelled like I was standing in a cornfield. It was like a
exactly
fresh corn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got some like fruit leather on the 4 grain bourbon. But there was a touch of that smokiness too that Michael was talking about.
Yeah.
Really excellent.
I get buttered popcorn.
Yeah, I do too.
I get banana chips.
Yep, I can see that too.
Yeah.
So the quad malt to me is a bit, what's the word? I guess more polished, if I'm explaining myself correctly. The flagship product is good. It's very good. It's spicy. I guess it's a bit more spicier than I expected for a 4 grain whiskey or bourbon. But then when you compare it side by side to malted, that spiciness is still there, but it's a bit more rounded. Like it's not as present as it is in your flagship. Again,
what you'll see too is like sometimes there's more spice on our bourbon than there is on our rye, which you'll taste later, is 100% rye, which is like I can't really explain it honestly, but like we use a different yeast, and I think that contributes a lot to that mellowed down spiciness. But it's kind of wild that that's only 11.4% rye, and you get quite a bit of rye spice from it. But if we didn't have the wheat in there to balance it out, it'd be really spicy.
what's also interesting about the club itself, and this is again through the experience of doing these things many, many times over, different people value different components of whiskey drinking differently. Meaning, some people gravitate towards the nose because that sets up the entire experience. Some people go for palate because that's obviously what you feel. And then some people go for the finish. Like if the finish isn't there, the whiskey isn't good for them. So like it's interesting to see how these 5 expressions are going to play out today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Is some people like spicy and some people don't. Some people like sweet, some people don't. So that's what's kind of fun about whiskey, is everything's different and fun.
Yeah, I like the quad malt. It's unique, but it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did that on purpose just because we wanted to taste them side by side, and so we bottled at the same proof, same everything.
Colby and I were drinking with somebody yesterday, and he described the quad malt as barbecued corn. And I had never, it blew my mind. I was like, oh, wow. And I'm kind of impressionable, as they know, but.
Yeah.
I can see like Mexican street corn.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like almost like a chipotle aftertaste to it. Just a tinge of that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to play with the packaging.
Do you want to go start the tour?
Yep. So you're gonna start, right?
Yeah, so we can sip on the 2 bourbons. Colby's gonna go get ready for the tour. Oh.
After he finishes.
After he's
I'm going to the tour.
It'll take them just about like
You
2
didn't want me to
minutes
come on.
to walk out.
All right, I'm standing in front of the distillery right now, so right in the middle of the farm. If I pan over, you can see some big tractors right over here, some green, beautiful green fields right behind it. We have our bottling room is right over here, our bottling line. That's our malt house is right there by the next to those silos. If I pan over here, we have our barrel house. So this is our first barrel house. It holds only 1,456 barrels, but we have two behind it that hold 8,500 barrels each. Right on the other side of the malt house, we have a mill set up right on the other side of these silos where we mill all the grains. Thank you, Mike. Here's Mike. So we have a mill set up where we can mill all the grains. So it's all done right here. We're right in the middle of the farm. So the office where Mike's walking towards is our old dairy barn that my grandpa built in the 50s that we converted into the office where I just was and Ashley and the team are. I'll pan over and here's Ashley and I live in the main house over here. It's built in 1918. It's on the National Historic Register. But it's really great to be right in the middle of the farm here. Literally the grains just come right from the field right next door to the distillery. We designed all the building and everything ourselves. We did all of our own electrical, plumbing, gas lines, steam lines, mash lines, drain lines. Everything was all done by us in-house. We designed it all ourselves. We had a contractor kind of help us with the main part of the building, but it really means a lot to us to have our hands in every part of everything so that we really understand it. We know how to do things. We can operate it better that way too, by really getting a good grasp and also fix it, keep it going and get the most out of it. So you guys are probably familiar with distillation, but I'll go over it real fast. The basics of distillation is alcohol has a lower boiling point than most liquids. So the boiling point of alcohol is 172 degrees. You boil anything with alcohol in it above 172, the alcohol begins to boil, turns into a vapor. You condense that boiling alcohol vapor back into a liquid by cooling it. And that's distillation. You're essentially boiling out the alcohol. It's the easiest way to clean it. So we have two different kinds of stills. We have stills and we have a pot still. They both work a little bit different. In the continuous still, we inject mash at the top, and you can actually see it in the sight glass right here. We inject mash at the top, steam at the bottom. The steam heats up the mash. The alcohol begins to boil, goes through a series of condensers, and comes out continuously. So as long as we're pumping in mash at the top, steam at the bottom, we get alcohol nonstop. The pot still is a little bit different. We fill it up, you heat it up, you fill up the pot, you heat it up. The alcohol goes up the head of the still to the condenser, and the condenser condenses that boiling alcohol back into a liquid. So, most distilleries have a continuous still with a doubler. The doubler is also a continuous operation. And the problem with that is with the pot still, we can take different cuts. So we take a heads, a hearts, and a tails cuts. And in all alcohol, there's things like methanol, acetone, and things like that. They're in very small quantities, but they also have a lower boiling point than alcohol. So what we do in the pot still is we heat it up really slow. We collect all the distillate that comes off first. We throw it away. That's the heads. The middle run, or the hearts, is what we want to keep and we put in barrels. And then towards the end is the tails. And the tails, there's really nothing wrong with it other than it's oily and off flavored, and we just want to get rid of it. We don't want that. It's kind of what gives it that kind of moonshiny, funky taste that we just don't care for. So we get rid of that too. The way that we do that is all with differing boiling points. So we can do that with the pot still. We couldn't do that with the continuous still and a doubler. And so what we designed, and we had Vendome Copper and Brass made this. They're the same guys that made Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, Maker's Mark, Buffalo Trace, all the big guys stills. And they'd made at the time hundreds, if not thousands, of continuous stills, and same with pot stills, like a lot of pot stills. But they never made them where they work in unison together like this. Rather than having a doubler, you have a pot still. And I've always been a firm believer that you can fine tune your product better, like by taking heads, hearts, and tails cuts how you want them in the pot still. But you just can't get the quantity that you can off of a continuous still. Continuous still are so much more efficient. And so what I love about this system is you can do quantity and quality, because what we do is we strip everything. We take it from 8% mash, or let me back up. The reason that the downfall of a pot still is you can't do a lot of quantity because you have to fill it up. You have to wait for it to heat up. You have to take the heads, the hearts, the tails cuts. You have to wait for it to cool down. You have to fill it up again. It's a slow process. So what we do is we strip everything in the continuous stills. We take it from 8% mash to 40% alcohol, and then we redistill everything in the pot still. And therefore, and we can still take heads and hearts and tails cuts. But now instead of putting 8% mash in the pot still, we're putting in 40% alcohol, and we're getting 5 times more volume per batch. So we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. We're getting quantity and quality. So we really like it. We've had several people come and taste our white dog right off the stills and say that these are whiskey people that write books on whiskey, and say it's the best unaged whiskey they've ever had, best white dog they've ever had. And I think it's because of that process of continuous still and pot still. As you can see over here, the beautiful liquid coming off the pot still is just crystal clear. That's bourbon right there. It'll get all of its color and a lot of its flavor from the barrels. So when we built this still, like I said, Vendome helped us build it, but they had never made a continuous still and a pot still that work in unison. There was no manuals, no books, nothing to help us operate it, and also not to put it together. So when they built it, they built it in the factory. They took 2 pictures, they disassembled it and sent it to us. And we literally put it together looking at these 2 pictures. And it was really a blessing in disguise, because we really understand it now. We really know what it does, why it does what it does, how it works, how to fix it, how to keep it operating. But a funny story is when we built it and we got it all together, we called Vendome and said, hey, this is great. Like, everything's working good. We got it working and put together. It was a little bit hard looking at these 2 pictures and putting it together, but we got it and everything's fine. Well, they said, wait a minute, we didn't send you the blueprints. And so this whole time they had blueprints, and we had put it together without even looking at the blueprints. But it was really, really kind of a fun time for me to help figure it out. That's what I love to do as a farmer, and I love to tinker with things and build things. So here's the mash cooker. So we have 5,000 gallon mash cooker. Grains have a lot of starch in them, and starch is basically like a long sugar molecule. And so by cooking the grains, we break the grains into the starch into fermentable sugars. It's really important. Then we add yeast. The yeast converts the fermentable sugars into alcohol during the fermentation process. It takes about 4 days to ferment. So as you can see, we have 4 fermenters. One's empty because it's going to get filled from the mash cooker. And we empty one tank. So we have 4 fermenters. It takes 4 days to ferment. We empty one and fill one every day. Each fermenter produces about 3,200 to 3,500 bottles, depending on what we're making. After 4 days, we pump it over to the mash cook or the beer well. The beer well is essentially a big serving tank that has an agitator in it, and it feeds the continuous stills, because we don't want the liquids and the solids to separate while we're pumping them over to the continuous stills. We want a really consistent liquid being pumped over there. So we just added on to the distillery. We had 2 new fermenters, another mash cooker, and a big water tank that literally is only a couple months old. Hopefully we get our approval from the building inspector to start using them on Monday. But I'm taking outside now to the separator. So what this is, after the mash comes off the stills, we bring it over here to the separator. The separator separates the liquids and the solids. So you can see the liquid coming off right there. The solids get augured up. They get fed to the dairy cows next door. It's still really high in feed value. So the dairy cows eat the solids. The liquids goes into our irrigation system, and it's still very acidic. And our ground here is a little bit on the alkaline side, and so that acidic liquid goes onto our soil and helps balance the pH so we can grow a better crop. We don't waste anything. It's a really important process for us, is to try to utilize everything and not have any waste. So another neat thing is that the dairy cows next door make manure. Manure is the best fertilizer there is. So we bring that back to the fields and spread it on the fields. So we don't have to buy a bunch of commercial fertilizer, which a lot of times commercial fertilizer comes from Russia, China, Canada, South America, all over the world. So we're able to benefit from that by not having to buy a lot of it. We're going out to the barrel house now.
Colby, as you're walking towards the barrel house, here's a question for you.
Okay.
What is the climate like at your rig house, and how does it impact aging?
That's a good question. So our barrel houses are unheated, unair conditioned. It gets down to 0 degrees during the coldest part of the winter, and it's 100 plus during the hottest part of the summer. So this year it's already been 107 for a few days, but last year I think it was 108 for a week or two, and then it gets down to 0 degrees. And that's really important because during the hot summers, it expands in the barrels. During the cold winters, it contracts. So if we take one of the bungs off right here, right now, it would shoot out because it's got pressure. In the winter, if we take one out, it would have a vacuum, like it'd suck in air because it's got that vacuum. And you can actually see it really good right now where there's like barrels leaking right now because of that pressure. And it really adds a lot of color and a lot of flavor to the wood because two things. When it's expanding and contracting, it's pushing into that char level on the char layer on the barrel. Well, the char level has charcoal, creates charcoal. Charcoal has carbon in it. Carbon is a natural filter to absorb impurities. It's like your Brita filter in your house.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's filtering out any impurities in the whiskey, number one. Number two, it's called the Maillard reaction. When you char anything, you char a steak, you char your toast, you're actually bringing out the natural sugars that are in whatever you're charring, in this case, the wood. So you're bringing out the natural flavors and sugars that are in the wood. So in a higher char, you get a lot of like chocolate and vanilla and like those sweeter flavors that you might taste in your whiskey. So all of our barrels are a char 4 on the staves, which is the highest char, and a char 3 on the heads. And that creates a little bit of complexity. The char 3 has a little bit different flavor profile than char 4. And we really like that because we did some at char 3. We did some at char 4, and we really liked them both, but we liked them even better when you blended them together. And so we decided to do every barrel with 2 different char levels just to kind of give it that complexity and different flavors. Like I said, this room is unheated, unair conditioned. Right now, it's only 90 degrees inside. But you can tell it's 55% humidity. Normally we keep it around 65 or 70, but we got the door open for you guys right now and it lost a little bit of humidity and shut off the humidifier, which we have a humidifier right here. So it's unheated, unair conditioned, but we humidify it for a couple reasons. Number one, in Nevada, we're the driest state in the nation, very little humidity. It'd be very dry in here. So we get a huge amount of angel share. But the second thing, and it's really important, at high humidity, you actually lose more alcohol than water. So your proof will stay the same or possibly go down. Whereas at low humidity, your proof will actually go up because you're losing more water than alcohol and the ratio of that angel share. So what happens is we want it to actually stay the same or possibly go down, the proof, because then we have to cut it with less water to make it our 90 proof, like our Flagship bourbon, or 100 proof, like our rye. That way it's more concentrated, more flavorful, and we're not cutting it down quite as much. So it's really important for both quality and quantity to have humidity. That's the only thing that we don't have here that they have in other places. There's so many reasons why we can grow grain just as good or better than they can most places, and make whiskey just as good or better than most places. The only thing we lack is, it's kind of funny that on the farming side, that lack of humidity is actually a huge plus because we don't have mold, fungus, mildew problems in our crops like they do in most places. I have a friend that's a crop duster, and every year he goes to Nebraska, Texas, Kentucky, Kansas to spray fungicides on all their corn because they have mold, fungus, mildew, all these problems that that we've never had here because of that lack of humidity and lack of rainfall and everything else. We have that beautiful water that comes down, and we irrigate the crops when they need to get irrigated. So we're not relying on Mother Nature and having a feast and famine like they typically do in the Midwest. So it's really, really great that we are here in Nevada. We have so many good reasons that we can make really high quality whiskey. The entry proof in the barrels is all 125 proof. Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, what's the age of the whiskeys that we're tasting today?
So most of them, so our Flagship bourbon is usually around 5 years old. I'm not sure. The single barrel that you have is probably 6. And the quad malt is, what is it, 5.3, Ash? I think it says on the
mute.
bottle. Oh. And then our oldest whiskey we have right now is about 8 years old. I'm a firm believer that the whiskey age, like I have a Pappy 23 and I don't like it as much as like the Pappy 10s or 15s or whatever, because as time goes on, the oak flavor is going up, the grain flavor is going down. And our goal from the beginning was to really showcase the grains that we grow. And in here in Nevada, I really think it accelerates the aging with the extremely hot, extremely cold weather that we have here. And so I think there's a tipping point. It's almost like a peak where I don't care for it. And that doesn't mean it's bad, but I don't care for it when it gets too old. And there's a saying in the wine industry also that you got to like what you make because you might end up drinking it all yourself. And I really don't care for those super aged whiskeys. And so our 8-year-old whiskey is really good, but it's getting pretty oaky already. And so that's why I'm not sure where our sweet spot's going to be. But we did just do a single barrel with the San Francisco wine spirits competition where they had their judges pick a single barrel.
Yep.
And we sent them 2 4.5-year-old barrels, 2 5.5-year-old barrels, and 2 6.5-year-old barrels. They immediately kicked out the 2 6.5 and the 2 5.5, and they were trying to decide between the 2 4.5. And they said that they were fantastic at that age and that flavor because the oak and the grain were kind of equal at that point. Not the oak wasn't overpowering the flavors that are in the bourbon. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that works, as time goes on.
Interesting. We go back and forth on this. We had this discussion many, many times. I think for most of us, again, I don't want to speak for everyone. I'll speak for myself. For me, the sweet spot for bourbon is between 8 and perhaps 14, and 14 is pushing it. Years of age. Anything over that becomes a bit too oaky for my palate. But then again, you have people all from all walks of life, and some people enjoy abundance of oak in their whiskey. So
exactly, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and everybody has different preferences, but we actually had some big whiskey consultants come out and they tasted our whiskey at 3.5 years old, and they said this tastes like a traditional 6 or 7-year-old whiskey already. And I think it's that kind of extreme temperature that we have here, and it'll be interesting to see how our 10-year-old whiskey compares to other 10-year-old whiskeys.
What's also important to remember, and I think through doing these, and a lot of people on these calls have been with us for other virtual tastings as well. Like the age in and of itself doesn't really mean much, right? You need to understand other aspects of it, the size of the barrel, the char, the microclimate, like all of these things kind of go hand in hand. And so like if you're just comparing ages, it's apples to oranges a lot of times.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a great analogy, and I agree with that 100%. And so that's why we're still seeing where a whiskey will be at 10 years, but it might taste a lot older than it really is. And that's, to me, maybe a good thing, but maybe not a good thing. And so it's kind of interesting for me to figure that out. But one thing about whiskey aging is traditionally the older the whiskey, this is looking back like 40, 50, maybe plus years ago, the older whiskey was aged longer because it had a flaw in it. And the longer you aged it, it masked those flaws. And so by putting a cleaner whiskey, like I showed you guys earlier with the continuous still and the pot still, by putting a cleaner whiskey and starting off with a cleaner start, you end up with, you don't need to age it as long to mask those flaws that might be in the whiskey. And so a lot of times we'll taste whiskey and they're fantastic. And sometimes we'll taste, this is unaged whiskey, White Dog, right off the stills. And sometimes they're really moonshiny and kind of have an off flavor that the barrel masks as you leave it in the barrel longer. And so today there's a lot of really good whiskeys that are left in because of the quality, and they want to leave it in, and it's not hiding a flaw. But it's kind of interesting to kind of look back at the history and know that older whiskeys were left in for a reason, and that's to kind of mask those flaws.
Yeah, I don't remember who said it, but on one of these calls, somebody once said that the battle is won and lost at mash bill. Like if what goes into the barrel has flaws, the barrel isn't going to magically cure it. So
yeah, unless you put so much oak flavor with it that it masks it. You know what I mean? Correct. And that's why it was aged, right?
Correct.
And it's never going to fix it totally, but it's gonna hide a lot of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'll take it back over from here. Well,
And I'll be right back to the office if you guys have any
Yeah.
questions.
So while Colby's walking back, we can dig into the rye. I've got mine pre.
The rye smells amazing.
Yes, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So just some, I guess, facts on the rye. It's a bottled and bond. Mash bill is 100% rye, so no other grain. Aged for a minimum of 5 years. 100 proof, obviously bottled and bond. But would love to kind of hear some of your guys' tasting notes as well.
I love the legs that it has. I haven't tasted it yet, but the legs that it has in the glass, it's awesome.
I get a lot of burnt sugar, almost like brown butter, but I would have a hard time picking out that it's a 95.5 rye without knowing.
No, it's 100
It's
rye.
100% rye.
100% rye.
It's
Okay,
100%
I
rye.
would almost pick it out as like 60-30, like it's
Right.
because there's something else going on here. There's a lot of sugar notes and a lot of like
Yeah.
the honey you get from bourbon.
But there's
So
some,
my
there's some
favorite
sweetness
tasting
too.
note for the rye is on the nose. I get bazooka bubble gum. Wondering if anybody else gets that. I also get some sarsaparilla, like the little root beer barrels.
Ashley never gets it, but I always get mint
Yeah, dried mint.
on the palate. Sorry.
I get the root beer, the sarsaparilla.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Well, like candy, like Halloween candy. It's like
yeah.
Yeah.
You remember those root beer barrel candies, the hard candies?
Yep.
That's exactly what I've.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
That's what Ashley gets, yeah.
the whiskey is a bit misleading in a good way. It's like, yeah, on the nose, like you, as I said before, that sets up your drinking experience, and you expect it to be sweet, but it's far from, right? It's a rye after all, so it drinks like a rye. So there is like this disparity between nose and the palate, and normally like that's a no for me personally, but in this case it actually works.
Yeah,
So
very
it's funny
oily
because
and sugary. I love it.
Yeah, we decided to do 100% rye because when we started, we distilled the grains all by themselves because we didn't want to have any other influence and flavor from the wheat, rye, barley, corn,
From another
whatever,
grain,
from
yeah.
another grain. So we wanted to distill them by themselves. And when we distilled the 100% rye, we're like, holy crap, this is delicious at 100%. We're never going to change it. Like, it's so good. And so we left it at 100%, even though it's the biggest pain in the ass in the distillery to distill, because I'm sure you guys have heard about the horror stories of making rye. There's these polymers in rye that are almost like, I don't know, the easiest way for me to explain it is it's like slimy. You stick your finger in there and you go like this, and it's sticking between your finger, you know? And the problem with that is during fermentation, it creates CO2. The CO2 needs to flow to the top of the tank and dissipate. Well, it can't flow through that slimy part of the rye. So it actually like grows in size in the tank until it gets to a certain viscosity, and then it just drops, right? So the first time we ever made rye, we overflowed the tanks a couple times because, you know, those bubbles were creating all this extra space, and it was like overflowing until we really figured out exactly how to mash it in and the right temperatures and all that kind of stuff. But it's really interesting, and it's really apparent to me why nobody makes 100% rye, because it's a giant pain to make.
Yeah. It's delicious.
So the bourbon represents about 80% of our production in the distillery. The rye represents about 15, so much smaller quantities. And then the last percent of our production is in innovation, which is one of the examples is our quad malt, but we also have 100% wheat whiskey, 100% oat whiskey, 100% malted corn whiskey, and then some other really fun stuff that we haven't released yet.
Yeah.
You have any plans on doing 100% malted rye?
okay.
Not yet. We don't have any in the pipeline yet. And so the problem with doing too many malted products is we're limited on our malting capacity. So we tried the corn and the quad malt just because we wanted, like, I really wanted to taste the malted bourbon compared to not malted bourbon, basically. And but someday we might add another malter, which we are adding another malter in 2 weeks, which means we might have enough capacity to do some other fun stuff like that.
So really quick, the first question was the enzymes in the rye. Do we use enzymes?
Yeah, we use enzymes in the rye. Since we're not using any malted barley, we have to use enzymes to help break it down. And that's one of the learning curves is we put a little bit of enzymes in, but not enough. And that's why it blew up. But you really need those enzymes. Do you guys know why enzymes are important? You want me to kind of explain that? So the easiest way for me to explain, like I'll just take bourbon, for example, and why it's always 10 to 15% malted barley usually. When we mash in bourbon in the mash cooker, we had the corn at 200 degrees. Any more than that, we could burn the corn. And so we want to be very careful, but we got to cook it enough to break down the starch into sugar. Then we cool it down to 165 and we had the wheat and the rye. And any more than that, we could burn them. Well, at this point, the viscosity of the mash cooker is very thick, super thick, like very, the agitator is really working hard. So then at the end, at 155, we add in the malted barley. And common sense would say by putting more solids into an already thick liquid, it's going to get thicker, right? But the enzymes that are created during the malting process liquefy the starch in the other grains, and it actually becomes more watery. So it helps liquefy the starch, which creates a better and easier environment for the yeast to work in. It also creates a better fermentation, different flavors and everything else. But that's why malt is so important. So that's why malt is so important in almost all whiskeys. You can also replicate that by using commercial enzymes. So that's how we can get away with it in the 100% rye whiskeys. We use commercial enzymes to help break down that starch. They're basically derived from the same enzymes that we use or that we create during the malting process. So somebody also asked what the malting process is. That's a really good question. The easiest way for me to explain what malt is essentially you're sprouting the grain. Grain is a seed, right? So you take the grain, you first you hydrate it, so you're getting it to absorb moisture. You're trying to mimic Mother Nature is what we're doing. So we hydrate it, we get it to a certain percent moisture, and we put it inside a big drum. Now, a lot of places will use they'll put it on the floor and allow it to germinate on the floor. But we use a big drum, and what the drum does is it creates the ideal germinating conditions. We can heat it, we can cool it, we can humidify it, we can do whatever it takes to get it to germinate. Once it gets to a certain place in its germination, we can actually, we dry it, so we stop any future growth by drying it, and we've harnessed all those enzymes that are created during that germination process that we need in the distillery to create that starch liquefaction process of the starch. Most distilleries don't do that. It's such a labor-intensive extra step that we do. We could probably buy malt cheaper than we can even make it for, but we want 100% farm to glass whiskey. We want to have 100% control over the entire thing, and so we have to malt our own barley to be able to do that. So you can malt any grain, but that's also why you don't see a lot of corn, rye, or wheat malted other places, because barley's really easy. So you can do it on the floor, like they traditionally malt on the floor, and they just allow it to germinate on the floor, and they mix it a couple times and stuff. But corn, you actually have to add quite a bit of heat to get it to malt right. So we add heat to the drum. When you do rye, you actually have to add a lot we have to have cold air going into it. We have to air condition the air before it goes into it. And it's so funny how it's very similar to the farm. When we plant corn, we plant it in May, and it has to be really warm soil temperatures, no chance of frost, and the corn will grow great. Rye is a winter variety, our rye. We can plant it in the fall. It'll grow real slow all winter. Anything above 32 degrees, the rye will actually grow. So in the malting drum, we actually have to cool the rye. Otherwise, it'll grow too fast. It's too vigorous. Whereas the corn, at the same time, we might have to actually add the heater to actually get it warmer. And it's so interesting how it's so similar, whereas barley's kind of right in the middle. And it's almost hard to mess up barley, and it kind of makes sense why barley is malted traditionally, most of the time.
You mentioned something about yeast earlier.
Yeah.
What can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we use different yeast for the different whiskeys. So we use two different kinds of yeast on everything. So we use a dry champagne style yeast. It's actually like a champagne yeast for alcohol production. And we use in the bourbon, we use an ale yeast actually for the bourbon, and it's Tennessee whiskey yeast for the rye, as well as the champagne yeast for the alcohol production. Champagne yeast is really vigorous, and it can withstand kind of the lower As time goes on, you get a lot of stuck fermentations if you don't use something like a champagne yeast to kind of finish it off all the way to the last little bit.
Yeah, and this is a good segue. In terms of farm strength, in terms of the single barrels, do you guys only do single barrels for bourbon, or do you guys do single barrels for rye as well?
We do single barrels for rye as well. The problem is it's only like 15% of our production.
Right.
So usually we'll do like 4 or 5 a year. Not many. Most of them stay here in the tasting room, just because we don't have a lot of it. So we do mostly bourbon, and then actually, so the next one we want to taste is the farm strength, which is really interesting too. So we call it farm strength because every time we blend our bourbon, our first one that we did, our flagship 90 proof bourbon, we take off 5 or 6 bottles and we taste it ourselves, and it's what we drink on the farm. It's like, it's really good, and it's like our big blend. It's like 100 to 120 barrel blend, and it's really good. And we've always said, like, why aren't we bottling this? And so finally we bottle it. It's our farm strength. It's whatever the batch strength is. So it's kind of our batched bourbon, but barrel strength.
Proof, yeah.
Barrel proof. And this one's 124.3.
Yeah.
And this is batch 9, right? Yeah, we haven't released batch 10 yet. So what's interesting is it's the same exact mash bill, the same liquid as our flagship 90 proof. It's just not cut down to 90 proof. So it's kind of neat to taste them side by side too.
What was the proof on this one? The farm strength?
124.3.
Okay. It does not drink like 124.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? And it's a lot more, it's concentrated, flavorful, but doesn't have that alcohol, extreme alcohol flavor.
Was that the one titled cask strength on the label?
Oh yeah, yes, but our single barrel, the next one is also cask strength, but it's a single barrel. So the next 2 are both cask strength. What's the proof on
It
that
says farm strength uncut.
Yeah, I see
on
that.
the label.
Yeah,
Yep.
I see that now. Thank you.
133.
Yeah. The next one's a single barrel, it's 133. So that's the differences between the 2. Yeah, marshmallow.
Yeah.
I think I got one time, and I don't taste it as much today, but I got s'mores, like
Yeah,
graham cracker, chocolate, marshmallow.
that's what I'm getting.
I'm actually getting a fair bit of clove, which I don't typically get from bourbons.
Did you say the barrel entry proof on these?
Yeah, 125. So this one pretty much held or lost a little bit of proof, whereas the next one gained a little bit of proof.
Is that even with you adding the humidity like you talked about earlier? So if you didn't, if you let it just be as dry as it is, what would the...
Oh, it'd really get out of hand. I don't really know, but it'd probably be similar to like Texas, where they just get syrup if they age it too long, And that's always been kind of my fear, is like I don't want to go too fast, but I also those extreme temperatures really help to age it better. But I don't know what to do, but I know that the proof would go up a lot. Yeah, the rye goes in at 125 proof too. But what's really odd is, like, this is a barrel of a blend of 120 barrels. We're tasting through the barrels. We kind of push out our favorites that are different, like for different reasons. So when we do our single barrels, we'll pull down 140 barrels. And if one's extra creamy, extra spicy, extra caramel, extra something unique, extra woody, whatever, we'll kick it out for the single barrel program to offer. Those tend to be a lot higher proof. So a lot of our single barrels are 130. We had our first hazmat single barrel not too long ago.
That's what they call it.
They're a lot higher, but they don't taste a lot higher. So the higher proof ones taste like they're a lot less proof than a lot of our lower proof ones. But as you can see in our blend, it's really pretty close to that 125. It maintains that 125 proof. And if we didn't have that humidity, it would really go out of hand and get really high.
It tastes dense to me, if that makes any sense, like a meringue, like not a lemon meringue pie, but if you just had a meringue. I know that the French have that weird cookie,
It's
kind of like that.
It's like a cake
Where-
frosting, like a dense
A
cake.
macaron.
Yeah, macaroon, yeah, or macaron, whatever, yeah,
Macaron is the cookie.
yeah. But it's it's good. I like it. I see where you're getting the s'more from, and I think that's where that tail end, there's just a touch of vanilla in there.
Yeah.
It's bold.
So this one's got a lot of press lately. Like it's really been taken off. And we just had an article written where they did the 10 newest whiskeys, and one of them was Weller, and what other ones like Penelope Weller, several other big name companies, and they did a blind with 10 new whiskeys, and ours got number 1 out of all 10. The farm strength did.
Oh wow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry if you guys have already said this, but what is the mash bill of that farm strength?
Same as our first bourbon,
Yeah.
and the same as the single barrel. So 66.6% corn, 11.4% rye, 12% malted barley, 10% wheat.
And you said it was a winter wheat. Is that a red wheat or?
It's a soft white winter wheat. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good question. So for those of you that don't know, wheat has several different varieties. There's soft white, soft red, or hard red. Soft white, hard red, soft red. So, and that just has to do with how they mill, how they grow, and what they are. So it's a soft white winter wheat. And there's also spring wheat that has all those same things. And we've always been a firm believer that winter grains are better because it allows them to grow real slow all winter. They stool out. They almost grow a better root system because they're not growing up during the winter. They're all growing this really hardy root system. So when the spring comes, they already have this nice established root system so they can grow. And when we plant spring grain, like a spring wheat and a winter wheat, we harvest them almost the same time of year, like in the end of summer. But the spring wheat has to go from seed all the way to maturity in a real short period of time, whereas the winter wheat, you plant it in the fall and it grows real slow, and by the time spring comes, it's already got an established root system. So now it can withstand drought better. It can absorb and uptake the nutrients and everything from the soil better because it's not trying to just grow up. The spring crops, they're trying to grow up, and it's trying to, the life cycle of a plant is to reproduce. So it's just trying to grow up, throw out some grain so that it can reproduce for the next year. Whereas the winter grain, it's growing up, but it can do that because it's already got this established root system, whereas the spring crops don't.
Colby, you had mentioned earlier that you guys, in your growing practices, you skew your harvest towards higher quality and sacrifice some yield. Can you explain what some of those decisions look like?
Yeah. So one of them, the easiest one or the best one that really makes a lot of sense to me is like take nitrogen fertilizer. Traditionally, the more nitrogen you put on a grain crop, the more yield you get. The problem with that for distilling purposes is nitrogen boosts protein in grain. Protein and starch are inverse. So when one goes up, the other goes down, and vice versa. So if we throw in a lot of nitrogen, it's going to boost protein in the grain. Well, now the starch is lower. Well, starch is what we use in the distillery to create alcohol. Protein is almost a nuisance. It creates like a protein haze. It's just not valuable in the distilling world. Now, what's really interesting about that is in the cattle market, which is the biggest consumer of grain, they want protein. So it's almost a win-win. You add a bunch of nitrogen fertilizer, you get better protein, the cattle love it. It's a win-win-win for the farmer and the purchaser. But in the real agriculture commodity world, there's no quality incentives for grain. So if I were growing grain for the commodity market, I'd put on a bunch of nitrogen and it'd get higher proteins, and it'd probably go to a cattle market and everybody wins. But for me, I can sacrifice that quantity for quality for our purposes. And that's what traditionally grain isn't grown for a purpose. It's just grown for the open market, and wherever it goes, it ends up, And so we actually grow grains for the specific purpose where we can grow the exact variety too. So like certain varieties might yield better, but they might not mill as good. They might not ferment as good. They might not taste as good in the distillery. So we can sacrifice those for what we're doing and growing it for a specific purpose, So there's a lot of little things that we can do. You can drought stress grain. It tastes a little bit different. It might change the physical profile. Sometimes we might want to do that. Sometimes we might not. But so that's the easy one for me to really understand and explain to everybody.
That was fascinating. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah, we've done quite a few of these, and I will say that I'm impressed. Like this is really cool. Even though your video was a little choppy, but just you walking around and showing us virtually was kind of cool.
Oh, thank you. No, we
like Michael said earlier, it's usually some guy or some gal standing behind a little bar and just kind of talking, which is also good as well. But this has been very interactive.
Sure, no, we're an open book. We like to show everybody everything. We don't hide anything. Like a lot of distilleries won't tell you their mash bill, and we're like, why? It's not that big of a deal, you know what I mean? And for us, nobody could really copy our whiskeys if they wanted to, because they'd have to grow the grain in our soil climate, the way we grow it, the varieties we grow, everything. And so we're kind of an open book with everything we do.
Are you flirting with finishing at all?
So no, but a little bit. So
yes and no.
I told everybody we would never do it, because like our goal, like I said earlier, is to like showcase the grains that we grow. So by putting it in a sherry cask or a wine barrel or a whatever, it's almost masking the flavors of the grain, and it kind of defeats our goal. However, I made a few barrels of wine. I just like to challenge myself. We made wine for a while, and we were emptying the wine barrels, and I said, this is my one chance to put whiskey in a barrel of wine that I made also, and so I filled up a few barrels of wine barrels with whiskey, even though I told myself I wouldn't, and that's not what we do. But it's actually wine that I made too, so it's kind of neat.
Yeah, I know. We kind of had low hopes for it.
Yeah, we thought if it's crappy, we'll just dump it or whatever, and it's actually pretty dang
really
good.
Yeah.
Our master distiller Russell at first was like, "This is going to be horrible," and then he tastes it. He's like, "This is pretty good."
No,
and I said, "No," and then he's like, "I'm like." I say that again. He's like, "This is not bad."
Not bad, yeah.
And I said, "No, you said this is pretty good." And we got into like a thing here where I wish I could rewind what he said.
Because he told me not bad.
Yeah. Because he was really down on it. But
the real question is, what did you do with all that juice?
The wine?
Yeah.
So this stuff went to a bakery in Bishop, California. Okay. And it's called Shots Bakery, and they sell it at the bakery there.
Nice. And what happened to the whiskey in that barrel?
The whiskey's still in the barrel, but we're gonna bottle it pretty soon.
Next month.
We so personally, I have a love-hate relationship with wine finishes. Honestly, I think it's very tough to execute, and I think a lot of times wine takes over, and then you end up with a product that's neither nor, right? Yeah. But having said that, there are some very, very tasty wine finishes on the market. So I hope.
Yeah, I would have done it if I didn't already have the barrels. But like Ashley said earlier, we're 80% bourbon, 15% rye, 5% other stuff. So my way to play around with the different flavors and everything is to do different mash bills. And so that 5%, we tell everybody it's 5% of our production, but 95% of the fun. Because we did 100% of each grain: wheat, rye, barley, corn, 100%. Then we did malted corn, like Ashley said, malted barley. We smoked one for like a Scotch style whiskey where we actually made our own peat. So peat is basically hundreds or thousands of years of decomposed plant matter, right? So what we did is we decomposed corn stalks, we pressed them in bread pans and made our own peat, blocks of peat. We dehydrated them then and we burned them. We made our own smoking system that is totally farmer style, where it's a silo with a chimney that actually goes in the top. And we have a fireplace that the chimney goes in. Then we have a little fan at the bottom of the silo, and it pulls the smoke through the barley from the top down. Because I didn't want to heat up the barley, because then it changes the profile. Like that's how you get, like in beer, you get like chocolate malts and different style, I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be consistent and unroasted, right? So we did that, and we made our own Scotch style whiskey. We did a smoked oat and rye. We have 100% oat whiskey. We have a 5-grain bourbon where it's wheat, rye, barley, corn, and oats. We have 4-grain whiskeys where we replace the wheat with oat, where we replace the rye with oat. What else do we do? Like all kinds. There's several other like fun things, but like that's my way to like express ourselves. Some people will do like a finished barrel. Ours is to play around with the different mash bills, because that's who we are. We grow the grains.
And
is that oat available for purchase?
It is in the tasting room, yeah. So we only have it in the tasting room. It's really like, it's earthy. Our first batch and our second batch tasted pretty different because our first batch was a variety called Magnum Oats. Our second batch was a variety called Naked Oats, because oats are kind of a pain in the ass too, where oats are 60% hulls, which is like the protective coating around the oat. It's like almost like a shell around it, but it's not a shell, but it's a hull. That means that it's only 40% of the actual like, oat that we're using to ferment. And then the 40% that's actually the oat part of it doesn't have as much starch in it as any of the other grains. So when we do a batch of oats, we only get like 1 or 2 barrels per batch. Whereas if we do bourbon or anything else, we get like 10 to 12. So it's like very low yielding, but those holes are a giant pain because I don't know if you guys have ever seen like the way wine ferments, but it's like the red wine, the skins float towards the top and you got to punch them down. Well, these oat holes all floated towards the top of the tank, but they were so hard that I could walk across the tank and not get them to push down. Like they were just stuck. So we got to shovel them out of the top of the tank because they're just a huge nuisance. So we try to run them through the continuous still and they just plug up the entire continuous still. And then oats have this like rubber substance that like coats the entire inside of the still and like almost like you could peel it off and stretch it like rubber. I don't know why they don't make rubber out of oats because it would work.
I gotta sneak out, guys.
Okay,
Nice
you gotta go,
seeing you. Yeah.
she's got to go home and take care of the kids.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. So, guy, before we actually, did we taste the single barrel? I'm sorry, I completely
No,
missed
let's
it.
taste the single barrel.
Oh, it's
Right.
right here, and it
Okay.
smells delicious. Holy cow!
While you were talking, like I was actually enjoying the smell of it and actually taste of it. And to your point, if you want to showcase your grains, I think this is the best expression of that.
Yeah, and you can taste like all 4. Like what's really fun for me is to taste the wheat, taste the oat, or taste the rye, taste the malted barley, taste the corn, and then taste the 4-grain bourbon, and then I can taste all 4 in it after I do that.
Yeah. Yep.
That single barrel, it's like buttery, creamy. It's delicious.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why. So this is one of our distillers reserves, and I really like that that mouthfeel that's like creamy like that.
Yeah.
And so that's why this is one of my favorites that we picked. And
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
it's got pretty much of everything. Like it starts out sweet and then it kind of transitions into that spice on the back palate.
it's 133 proof, right? What is it?
Yeah.
133.64.
133.64 proof.
Nice.
On the
I love
nose, I
that you
get
round
the
to the
butter
to the
and the
hundredth,
syrup.
too.
Yeah. Well, when we like when I pick a single barrel, like you were talking about, like some people like the finish, some people like the palate, some people like the nose. I really like the mouthfeel. And for me, this has like that creamy mouthfeel that I really like. It's not like, not super dry where it just like it feels like it's airing out your mouth. I want it to like that oily mouthfeel.
Definitely has that in spades.
Well,
Guys, as you're savoring this, I'm gonna put a link in the chat, and we're gonna, like, in the spirit of being interactive. It's a survey. Most of you have filled out similar surveys, and we're going to see like what expressions people loved the best, and we're gonna rank them in the order, and then we'll see, how we do, how you guys did today. I'm sure.
Can we rank all 5, like 1 to 5, or do we just vote for 1?
So the way this works is you're going to rank each one on a scale 0 to 10. And then I'll
Beautiful.
tabulate the scores and they'll give you the highest score and then the lowest score and basically all scores.
This that single barrel, really amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Really,
really
really
good.
good.
I'm a big fan.
Where can I buy this at?
Yes.
So this one's a distillery one, but and that's what's crazy about our single barrel program. They're all completely different, but they're good for different reasons. But that's what's really fun is we have some people, like we were talking about Charlie Gee, and there's a few other people that have like 20, 30, 40 different single barrels, and they love to collect them because they're all different. One might be spicy, one might be creamy, one might be, but traditionally our single barrels here at the distillery, because I like this style, like creamy mouthfeel. So does like Ashley and Russell, our master distiller, and usually it's a consensus between all of us. But
Maybe.
but there's some. We've done single barrels where the store will say I want my whiskey to leave skid marks. You know, and then we've got other single barrels where the guy's like, I just want the most creamy, or not creamy, I just want the easiest drinker, you know, and then it's so funny how everybody's different. But what's fun about the single barrel program is we offer what they like. So like we try to give them a creamy, spicy, you know, every variety.
I will say so we do a lot of these, right? Both physical and virtual. And the last one we were at, we were talking about the arc, you know, from start to finish, right? And a lot of whiskeys will have that like little heartbeat skip in the middle or towards the end where the finish just drops and it goes away and then it kind of comes back. I will say that this is probably one of the first ones where I've had where it seems that arc has been smooth on all of them. And this single barrel is, to me, to quote Michael, is a complete whiskey where, you know, from start to finish, there was no drop, right? There was no like, I'm waiting for the finish to come back and then it comes back. This one was completely there. And I'm really impressed.
Thank you. No, that means a lot. Like for me, being a farmer and then making the whiskey, like that's the kind of stuff that makes it all worth it. So thank you.
Colby, how far away from the air station are you?
Fallon?
Yes.
We're within the 5-mile radius of NAS Fallon.
So they fly over you every day.
All the time. And so if you go right to the southeast of us, it is the Stillwater, no, not Stillwater, it's the Carson Lake, which is a national wildlife refuge.
Yes.
So, but direct south of us is a big bombing range. So the helicopters fly right over us to the highway, and then they follow the highway to stay away from the wildlife refuge. And so they're buzzing us like every day, several times. The jets, I mean, they can fly over the thing in no time, but every once in a while we'll get somebody, but it's so cool. So those of you that don't know what we're talking about, it's NAS, Naval Air Station Fallon is here. And it's where they moved Top Gun to. It's the world's largest inland Navy base, which is an oxymoron to have a Navy base in the desert.
That's right.
But the reason why they do that is there's a huge amount of open area in the middle of Nevada that it doesn't have a big population. So they can do a lot of exercises like actual war games, like they can go and do dog fighting and they can go and drop live bombs or semi-live bombs and practice and do their thing. And so they have these carrier air groups of like 10 to 15,000 people come into town and they practice and train, and then they go back out to the carriers or their, you know, wherever they're stationed. So it's so cool to have all the Navy people. And that's really what, growing up, I grew up with all the, you know, being in a small farm town in Fallon, Nevada, I wouldn't have gotten out much or wouldn't have experienced much. But then I had all these friends that were from around the world from the Navy base. And so it really kind of opens your horizons and helps you out. It's funny,
I've been going there since the early 80s, back when they had those crazy little houses of ill repute there.
Yeah.
I think
they're still around. They're just not here anymore. There used to be one in Churchill County, but now you got to drive closer to Reno or Carson. My grandpa growing up, or when my dad was growing up and young, my grandpa needed to make extra money. Farms don't make a lot of money. So he rented out rooms in our house to different Navy pilots. And he said at dinner one time, we'll never forget, this pilot came and was eating dinner at the dinner table and said, yeah, we had the craziest thing happen today. I was flying with this guy and he was crazy. And he was flying underneath this bridge, right? And he says, he looks down and the guy says, watch this. And he goes underneath the bridge and he actually crashes the airplane, right? But he just landed it flat on in like the ravine, right? He looks down, he sees the guy sitting there like stopped on the ground. And the guy, I think, was thinking like, you know, oh shit, what am I gonna do now? And he hears the guy say, Mayday, Mayday, engine lost, going down, you know, whatever. And he'd already crashed. The guy's sitting on the ground calling engine problems because he didn't want to tell his, you know, his superiors that he was flying underneath the bridge and crashed the airplane.
The survey consists of 6 questions. First 5 asking people to rate each one of these expressions today on a scale 0 to 10. And then the final question, which I had no doubts that is going to turn out the way that it did, whether or not my members would want to see a prime barrel selection of your whiskey. So let's take it from the top. So your Flagship 90 proof scored 6.3, just so you understand how the scale goes.
Sure.
5 would be an average, right?
Okay.
Anything below 5, like you probably wouldn't care for, wouldn't probably have a bottle in your bar. Anything above 5, it's above average, meaning you would want something. Just the different levels of how much do you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so 6.3 is a pretty good score for a Flagship 90 proof bottle. Moving on to the quad malt, fared did better, 7.3. Some people are giving it 10. Actually,
Wow.
3 folks gave it a score of 10. And then
Really
a few more gave it 9, so that's pretty good. Your rye had exact same score. It's a little bit more universal just in terms of like if you're using a bell curve, right?
Sure.
The responses are a little bit more even. And then, to no one's surprise, the higher stuff, because this is a club of, barrel-proof drinkers. Farm Strep Uncut, it was 7.6, so is a second favorite expression. And then coming in at 9. We
Hey.
never had a score of 9, ever. This is the first time.
Hey, thank you.
So, I mean, look, 7 people ranked at 10. Most of the people ranked at 9, so that gives you an average rating of 9. So, and then the last question, all 24 people would want to see a battle from you. So that's really summarizes it. I mean, I had no doubts. When I tasted the single barrel, I'm like, this is it. And I think that was the overall feeling for the most folks online today. Is that a lot of times when we do come in person to select barrels, more times than I would care to admit, we'll leave that place with more than 1 barrel.
Yeah.
And the reason is like we just love 2 barrels or sometimes 3 barrels equally, right? And for different reasons. And I see people putting in the chat, hey, give us a barrel of bourbon and give us a barrel of rye. We'll take both. I concur with that. So look, we're not in a rush. Like we have a queue of barrels that will last us through the end of the year and then some. But as long as it happens, I'm happy. And I think most people on this call would be happy.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I think we've had more people come here and try to buy more than 1 barrel than only want to walk away with 2. But because they're so limited, like we've never been able to say yes to that, which is kind of a crazy thing that like I've never thought we'd get in the spot where like we'd have to be telling people no. Like if you told me that 5 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, right, but it's so humbling and so like it's just a dream come true kind of, you know what I mean? Not to have to tell people no, but to have people want it, you know what I mean?
Is whiskey your primary product right now, like being on a ranch, or do you guys have anything else?
So, I mean, wheat, rye, barley, corn are our primary like farm products, and then whiskey, then we grow the whiskey, and then we also grow a lot of alfalfa, which going back to the farm talk, we grow a lot of alfalfa, and what's interesting about the alfalfa is it goes to China, Dubai, Japan, and Taiwan. It like goes around the world because we're in this ideal growing area. We're in the high desert, so we're at 4,000 feet elevation. And it has really hot days and cool nights. And what that does, it allows the plants to grow during the hot days and breed during the cool nights. And it creates TDN, total digestible nutrients in the alfalfa, which makes it really high quality. And it's beautiful green because it's so hot during the day, it dries out fast. It's doesn't have a lot of humidity, so it doesn't get like black or mold or turn yellow. So it's this beautiful green, high quality, high test alfalfa that people like they seek it around the world. And so it goes from here to Long Beach, so kind of by where you are, goes on a boat and then goes around the world to go to all these different places. And so it's kind of the opposite of the grain, whereas the wheat, barley, and corn never leave our possession until we make it into whiskey. And Ashley tells everybody, like when you buy a bottle of our whiskey or we send it to our distributor, none of those ingredients have ever left our possession until we send it off or somebody takes it home. But the reason why alfalfa is so important in our rotation is alfalfa is a legume and it fixes its own nitrogen into the soil naturally. So we don't have to put a bunch of commercial nitrogen. All grain needs a little bit of nitrogen, just not a lot. So it fixes its own natural nitrogen into the soil, has these deep tap roots that go down and break up the plow pan. So as that alfalfa, the roots decompose, they naturally allow that percolation of the water. And I like to tell everybody, like if you look at a potted plant, it always has a hole at the bottom of it. you never grow it in an actual bowl that doesn't have a hole in the bottom of it, because that ground needs drainage. The pot needs to drain. Same with the soil. And so those deep roots help that drainage and drain the soil out and aerate a little bit and allows the rest of the plants to grow better. And so we always rotate our fields. You never want to grow the same crop in the same field year after year after year, because certain plants need different nutrients, different stuff. And so by rotating your crops, you're helping the soil rejuvenate. The other thing is, if you grow the same crop in the same field year after year after year, you get an accumulation of different pests that like that crop, right? So you grow corn, you grow corn, you grow corn again, all of a sudden you start having mites. You have different earworms and things like that grow, and they start to multiply because there's the host crop that they like. So by rotating your crop, we don't have those bad pests. We help rejuvenate, or it's better for the soil and everything. So we also grow a lot of alfalfa, but it's funny because our cash crop used to be alfalfa, where it was like our primary crop. And then we grow wheat, rye, barley, and corn as a rotational crop. Now our main crop is wheat, rye, barley, and corn, and almost like the alfalfa is our rotational crop, because making whiskey is so much more important than sending a feed to China, Dubai, Japan, and Taiwan.
This was thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you guys so much.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
We appreciate everybody. It means a lot that you guys spent time with us.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah, I
for
love
the
this.
tour. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
taking the time to tour the
Cool.
place. And
You guys all have a great night. We appreciate it all.